Mark chapter 14. Mark 14, verse 53 is where we'll start tonight. You might remember that chapter 14 contains Jesus doing the Passover with the disciples, instituting the Lord's Supper, identifying his betrayer. He then moves with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane, where there's that well-known prayer of removing this suffering from him, if possible. Also, the chastising of the apostles for their not being able to watch as he had instructed them to do. Then there is this arrest of Jesus, the events that go on around that. Interestingly, there's this little short blip there about the young man who flees. Young man followed him with nothing on but a linen cloth, and they seized him, and he left the linen cloth behind and ran away. Some suspect that may have been Mark, but there's no identification for that. So what we have next is Jesus is before the Sanhedrin. Jesus has been arrested. He's been brought back into Jerusalem, and he's now there before the high priest. And you have that identified in chapter 14, verse 53. So in 53 through 65, and what I'd like to do is just kind of summarize that and identify, I think, some things that are quite significant when it comes to this section of the chapter. So look at 53 and following, because you have Jesus being led to the high priest. All the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together, and Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now, the thing that's significant here is the stage is being set for what Jesus had predicted was going to happen, which is Peter is going to deny him 3 times before the morning time comes. The last thing that we hear from the disciples as the group comes to arrest Jesus is the disciples flee. They all run. But Peter then finds his way back to, it says that he followed him at a distance. So as Jesus is being brought into Jerusalem, Peter obviously, is, as the text says, is following this group at a distance, and he comes into the courtyard, Peter followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he's sitting there among the guards warming himself. So this sets up that opportunity for Peter to be asked. That sets up the opportunity for Peter to deny. And so that's why this is included. This is how Peter gets back into the picture, gets back into the scene as Jesus is taken to the high priest, and the chief priest, elders, scribes came together. So there's Jesus before this council. Peter's there with the guards outside the gates. Verse 55, now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. So obviously they're seeking truth. They're seeking some evidence. They're seeking some way to pin something on him so they could justify their action, so they could justify their arrest, as well as what's going to happen and what they've determined must happen, which is the death of Jesus. So they're setting it up for that. But they couldn't find any testimony. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. just common sense will tell you if your witnesses do not agree, then that's not good for the prosecution. Well, I guess it's not whoever they're a witness for. I guess that's the way it would fall out. But if your witnesses do not agree, then there's going to be a very negative impact when it comes to trying to get this conviction. And so they're troubled. They're being stymied by the inability to get the right kind of witnesses, the witnesses that would agree, and many of them were bearing false witness, but they did not agree. Now, verse 57, and some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy the temple that is made with hands in 3 days. I will build another not made with hands. Yet even about this, their testimony did not agree. So their whole effort to try to get witnesses, even false witnesses, even witnesses that would make up stories, they couldn't get them to agree. We recognize that the statement about the building of the temple, destroying the temple, building the temple, all of that not only taken out of context, but the true words are not used in order to communicate. And there's this misunderstanding, obviously, about everything that Jesus had said anyway. So yet even about their testimony did not agree. Even about this, their testimony did not agree. Verse 60, and the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, have you any answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? So what's the high priest looking for right now? When he just turns to Jesus and says, so you tell us, what's your answer? How are you going to answer these accusations against you? So that's really what he's asking. What is your answer to all of these accusations? What's he trying to do here? If he can just get Jesus to open his mouth and incriminate himself, which he'll do. He eventually will, but right now it says that he keeps silent. The high priest stood in the midst, asked Jesus, have you any answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he remained silent and made no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. So the statement that's made there by Jesus is an incriminating statement because they're looking for him to make himself into what they claim he has identified himself as, which would be equal with God or the Son of God or in any of those cases. So he's asked, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And he said, I am. And then he adds this little part about, and you will see. And he describes the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming with clouds in heaven. So the idea that Jesus, the statement that he makes, or the very idea of what's going on here is that Jesus directly, well, it sounds to me like he's making judgment, pronouncing judgment against them. That you are going to see the judgment of God come upon you. The high priest, the people that are there, those that are conspiring against him, those that are false witnesses, and specifically talking to the high priest now, I think he's proclaiming judgment against the nation of Israel. He declares himself to be the Son of God. He declares himself, he does not shy away from that. He says, I am. And that seems to be pretty much what ends this interaction. So verse 63 and following, the priest tore his garments and said, what further witnesses do we need? You've heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? They all condemned him as deserving death, and some began to spit on him, and they covered his face and struck him, and they asked him, or they said, prophesy. and the guards received him with blows. The idea is, tell us who it is that's hitting you. You're God. You know everything. You're supposed to know, and so they strike him. Tell us who it is that's striking you. The word that Mark uses here is prophesy. All right, that moved pretty quickly through this first trial that Jesus is given or is subjected to, and it is before the Jewish council, before the high priest, and so it really ends abruptly once Jesus proclaims he is the Son of the Blessed. I am. That's exactly who I am. So any comments you'd like to make? Mm-hmm. Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, and they'd forgotten all about one of the Ten Commandments, not bearing false witness, uh, and they're looking for false witnesses. The problem was they just couldn't get them to agree. That's pretty sad court, isn't it? When you when you stack the court and you can't even get your witnesses to agree, and they're liars on top of that. Yeah, they met at night, which was against the law. There were all kinds of rules and regulations they had put upon themselves, which were good. And one of those is you were to hear all of the witnesses and all of the facts of the case, and then go home and wait. What was it, 3 days, and come back and then rehear everything again before you made a decision. In a capital case like this, they didn't follow any of their own rules at all. Anything else? So Jesus is in with this council. The high priest has assembled the council. The chief priests, elders, scribes all come together. And then we have Peter, who's outside. He's there with the guards, these very likely Jewish temple guards. And he's there at the fire, probably one of those nights that would be cool enough you'd need to be around that fire to be able to stay a little bit warm. And then that's all we really know about Peter at this point, is he's there. He has followed Jesus to this point. Yes. John evidently went in to the court. We learned from other accounts, but probably Peter didn't want to go in there. He didn't want to go any further than that, probably. But yes, he probably wasn't legally allowed to. So at the end of this, the attacks on Jesus begin. And this is one of those things that it makes us realize the severity of their, or the depth of their depravity, the severity of the length they'll go to in order to accomplish what they've already decided is going to happen. And to know he's innocent and to treat him in this way, and it begins here. It begins as they began to spit on him, and they cover his face and strike him, and obviously they make fun of him here as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, evidently, I think you're right about that. That if they had some inkling that this was actually that Messiah that was promised in the Old Testament, then their belief should have been strong enough to allow them to believe that if God sent him, then God's going to provide the victory. But that is exactly the attitude of the Israelites throughout the Old Testament, which was, yeah, God said we could have it, go in and take it, but but the Romans are here, or the giants are here, or the cities are walled, or it's just too complicated, or it would take away our money, take away our power, take away. It might even result in taking away our kingdom. If God got on the throne of David like they expected, then they're going to lose everything because they're not. I mean, they're going to lose. I mean, everything. He's going to clean house with all of these that have no faith. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he didn't need their help. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the obviously the Old Testament prophecies and the New Testament records of Jesus, he was reviled, but he reviled not. You know, he was mistreated, but he did not seek revenge. As a matter of fact, hanging on the cross, the words were, "Father, forgive them." Uh, he came to die for our sins, but he also came to show us God, and he did that. Um, he did that perfectly. Yeah, exactly. No, he didn't. And he didn't carry a sword. He wasn't training them in military uh, tactics. He wasn't seeking a right and left hand man. He wasn't seeking his cabinet or looking for those that would fill out as commanders within that. As a matter of fact, he was teaching them the opposite of war, and, and they never did grasp. I say never. They didn't grasp it for a long, long time. The nature of that kingdom. Yeah, good observation, Mike. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, it would have been very likely his death would have occurred on Friday before the Sabbath began on that Friday evening at 6 p.m., that which would have been the Sabbath, beginning of the Sabbath. You mean the Passover? Yeah, the Sabbath would have been every Saturday. Yeah, the Sabbath would have been every Saturday. Well, the reason they took Jesus off the cross and put him in the tomb and didn't finish the burial was because it was almost the Sabbath, which would have started at 6 p.m. So yes, at 6 p.m. Yeah. So whether I'm not sure about all that you stated there. I haven't looked at that in a while, but about the rules of the Passover. But that would have been Thursday night, which would have been the Friday of taking the Passover, which you're right, the 15th day of the month is when it was supposed to be done. Mm-hmm. And he describes his power and his judgment, both all in that same statement. Yep. Right. And they were not concerned about doing anything legally anyway, so it didn't matter if they had anybody there that they needed. They'd already determined what was going to happen, and they brought first false witnesses, and then they'd already determined. It didn't matter. So the next thing that you find is the denials of Peter, and those happen beginning in verse 66 through the end of the chapter. Peter, just if you might draw a line from there over to verse 54, where Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. So you pick up in verse 66, and as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with the Nazarene, Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed, and the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it, and after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you're one of them. You are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. So in that passage, you have all 3 of those denials that Jesus prophesied, and as Jesus had prophesied, those denials took place, and then immediately the rooster crowed. And we could talk about a lot of reasons that Peter would have done that, and we could talk about lack of faith, or we could talk about the fear that had overcome him and what had just happened with the arrest of Jesus and him pulling the sword, and then everybody flees. But he is here. He comes. He follows Jesus. So there's something that would make him come and try to be with Jesus, or at least observe. for all the reasons that he did what he did. Obviously, one of those things was that he probably feared some kind of hostility from them, some kind of retaliation if they believed him to be the follower or a follower of Jesus. All right, any observations about Peter's denials? Yeah, John. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yes. Yeah. Now Peter joins up with the others and locks himself in the room, obviously, but yeah, and John. So they may be at this moment brave, but it doesn't last. Yes, and he's the only one that's going to be there at the cross. He's the one that's going to be present. Yeah. Look at that first denial. Now, it's a little worded a little different depending on your translation, but look what he actually says. I neither know nor understand what you mean. Why? Why? What how does that add emphasis to his denial? I don't even understand what you mean. And by the way, what does that even mean? I'm clueless. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I don't even know who this guy is. I'm clueless. What are y'all talking about? Uh, the reason I bring that up is I just never had really focused on that as I had read this over time. That he actually put that emphasis on there. I don't know him, but then he adds, I don't even understand what y'all are talking about. I don't know what guy you're talking about. I don't have a clue what it. Mm-hmm. He finally calls down curses. That's the second thing. Since we're there, uh, their bystander said to Peter, "Certainly you're one of them, for you are a Galilean." Yeah, they were across the tracks kind of people. You don't mess with them. They're uneducated. They smell. They smell like fish. You can tell by the way they dress. You can tell by their dialect that they're Galileans. Uh, um, so he says, "You got to be one of those." But verse 71, he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." Now, translations are a little bit different there, but I think it communicates basically the same idea. I'm not sure. I've read some commentaries on exactly what it might mean to swear or curse, or what it might have meant when he said that. Not real convinced on knowing exactly what he did, except for the fact that he used some kind of I swear on my mama's grave, or I'll swear on the Bible kind of thing, uh, and and uh, and used words of emphasis that might have been used by Galilean fishermen from time to time. Mm-hmm. Okay, any other observations about Peter's denials? Okay, chapter 15 is the crucifixion of Jesus, and then everything is going to be contained here in chapter 15. You're going to have the delivery of Jesus to be crucified. You're going to have him being mocked by the soldiers and the way that they make fun of him, and then you're going to have the crucifixion, the death. You're going to have the burial. All of this is in chapter 15, so it's quite a full chapter. Obviously, all of Mark's chapters are full, but if you look at chapter 15, verses 1 through through 20, maybe the trial goes to verse 15. So 1 through 15 is another trial, and then you have 16 through 20, that is when Jesus is mocked by the soldiers, and the response then, and then because it says the soldiers led him away, verse 16, then verse 21, they compelled verse 20, they led him away to crucify him, and verse 21 is where they compel the passerby to carry the cross and so forth. So all of that is connected. You have some different titles of the particular paragraphs, but actually we'll look kind of at 1 through 20 as a whole. Won't be able to finish it tonight, but I want to get started in it so that we can complete it next week. So you have the trial. This is Jesus before Pilate. Jesus has been delivered over to Pilate. So you've had this Jewish trial where they condemned him to death because of his confession that he is the Holy One of the Son of the Blessed One. And so now you have him being delivered over to Pilate. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered, "You have said so." And the chief priest accused him of many things. Let's stop there. Getting through verse 3, you have Pilate asking Jesus if he has any defense, and he doesn't give a defense. Are you the king of the Jews? Let's see, how did he ask it? Are you the king of the Jews? And he says, "You've said so." And then there's this accusation, and then Pilate, by the Jews, and then Pilate asks him, how do you respond? What is your response? Do you have any answer? And don't you understand? Isn't there some kind of, do you understand the severity of these charges that they bring against you? Verse 5, Jesus made no further answer, so Pilate was amazed. All right, that's through verse 5. So you have the delivering over to Pilate. There are the accusations that the Jews give for bringing him to Pilate. By the way, he's bound. Maybe that's their rule, but I don't think he was much of a threat. But they bound him, brought him to Pilate. They agreed that the whole council agreed that this was the thing to do. They took him to Pilate, which would be a Roman court, and Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "That's what you said." And then they deliver their accusations, and Pilate gets no answer from him. And it says, Pilate was amazed. I think probably this idea of him being amazed is that of all the prisoners he's ever had brought before him, you think there's ever been one that's been silent? I mean, if I'm brought before Pilate and he says, "Okay, answer these answer these accusations against yourself. I'm going to start telling why they're not right, aren't you? I'm going to start. Well, number one, I wasn't even present when that murder took place. Number two, I don't even own a knife like that. So I'm going to start giving my defense. That's a good question. I don't know that. I know the Romans had the privilege of calling on a higher court, but I'm not sure about from this situation. Without looking at it, just from what just from what I know, it seems to me like this being Jewish and Jewish matter, the Romans had pretty much let them take care of their own stuff, and they're bringing this to him. We know why they're bringing this to him, but usually the Romans are going to stay out of something like this. So I'm not sure that he had the right to call on. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very possible. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just from what I know, we'll have to look deeper into it, but I don't think he had any recourse once he was brought to Pilate. I think he, I don't think he had any further recourse. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, English Standard says Pilate was amazed, so we're talking on the same plane. Right.